He told her to use the servants' entrance. He didn't know she owned the gate. It was a grey October morning in Kent, in the year 1818, when a plain travelling chaise turned in at the lodge of Stanmore Court, and the woman who stepped down from it did not look, to the eye of the Duke of Stanmore watching from his library window, like anything worth the interruption of his morning. She was perhaps 25, dressed in good dark wool without a scrap of ornament, and she came up the drive on foot rather than trouble the servants to bring the chaise round. An elderly clerk in a rusty black coat trotting at her side, with a locked dispatch box hugged to his chest. She did not gawk at the great house the way petitioners gawked. She stopped once, halfway up the drive, and drew from her reticule a plain steel watch, a cheap thing, the sort a shopkeeper carried, not gold, not even silver, and consulted it, and returned it, and came on, and the whole of her manner was that of a person arriving exactly where she meant to be, precisely when she meant to be there. Charlotte Weston had been managing her late father's affairs for 6 years, 4 of them while he lived, and could no longer see the ledgers for the cataract clouding his eyes, and 2, the last 2, because he had asked it of her plainly, a self-made banker who trusted his daughter's head for figures over any man he had ever employed. She had settled estates worth £250,000. She had foreclosed on a marquis and extended grace to a curate in the same afternoon, and lost no sleep over either, because her father had taught her that money is only frozen honesty, and that a reckoning fairly kept harms no honest soul. She had come to Stanmore Court on business she understood down to the last farthing, and she had learned, at the door, that the Duke of Stanmore did not intend to receive her at all. His Grace does not see tenants at the front, the footman informed her, not unkindly, only certain. Tradespeople and estate business go round by the east yard. The steward's office. Mr. Sowerby handles the rents. I have not come about rent, said Charlotte, but the Duke himself had come out into the hall by then, drawn by the novelty, and he stood at the foot of his great staircase and looked at the plain woman and her rusty clerk with the pleasant, absolute condescension of a man who has never once in his life had to be civil to anyone he did not choose to be. And he settled the matter. Whatever you have come about, the Duke of Stanmore said, you have come to the wrong door. I am sure my steward can dispose of it. The servants' entrance is round the east side. The footman will show you. Good morning. He had already begun to turn away. And madam, a word, since you are plainly a woman of business. That watch you carry, steel, do you know? One is judged in this country by such things. If you mean to treat with your betters, you would do well to leave the tradesman's tin at home. It tells the whole world exactly what you are before you open your mouth. The elderly clerk made a small strangled sound. Charlotte Weston laid a hand on his arm to still him, and she looked up at the Duke of Stanmore with an expression the Duke would spend a great many later nights trying to forget, not anger, not hurt, but a cool and total attention. The look of an auditor finding an error and deciding, for the moment, to let it stand. The watch was my father's, she said. He could have carried gold. He chose steel, and had it engraved, and I will tell you what it says another day, Your Grace, when it will mean more to you than it can this morning. She inclined her head exactly as far as his rank required, and not 1 degree further. I will use the east yard, since you wish it. But I think you will find, before the week is out, that you would rather have opened the front door to me. Good morning. And she turned and walked back out into the grey, and the Duke of Stanmore stood in his own hall feeling, absurdly, as though he had lost an exchange he had not known he was having, nettled against his will, by the one thing his rank could not command from a person, and had just failed to command from her. She had not been impressed. She had not been afraid. She had corrected him, in effect, and gone out to the servants' door of her own choosing, and taken all the power of the moment with her when she went. He did not yet know what she held. That is the pleasure of this story, and its justice. He had perhaps 3 days left of not knowing, and he spent the first of them irritated by a steel watch. What Charlotte Weston held, locked in old Mr. Finch's dispatch box, was the mortgage on Stanmore Court. Not a debt. The debt. Her father's bank held the whole of it, £40,000 advanced against the estate over 11 years, the lodge and the park and the great house and the home farm and the very gate the Duke had sent her round. All of it pledged as security. The interest 3/4 in arrears, the principal callable at the holder's discretion. Josiah Weston had bought up the Stanmore paper quietly over a decade, the way he bought everything, without fuss, and on his death it had passed to his sole heir and executor, who had come down to Kent to do what any prudent holder does with a defaulting estate, to inspect it, to reckon it, and to decide its fate. The Duke of Stanmore imagined he had dismissed a tenant. He had, in plain fact, told his single largest creditor to use the tradesman's door, a woman who could, with one letter to a court, turn the 15th Duke of Stanmore out of the house his family had held for 500 years. She could have sent the letter from London. She had come in person, because her father had taught her that you never foreclose on a man until you have looked at him, since half of all defaults are not wickedness but drowning, and a drowning man can sometimes be saved at a profit to everyone. She had come to see whether the Duke of Stanmore was a wastrel who deserved to lose his house, or a man worth saving. The morning's welcome had answered half the question. She reserved judgment on the rest, which was more grace than the Duke had shown her, and exactly as much as her father would have counselled. She did not go home. She took rooms at the inn in the village, and the next morning she went, as invited, to the East Yard and the steward's office. And there she met the second man of this story, and understood at once that the Duke's ruin was not the whole of it. Mr. Elias Sowerby had been steward and man of business to Stanmore for 20 years, a soft, heavy man with careful hands and a voice like poured oil, and he received the creditor's daughter with a wariness that curdled, within a quarter hour, into something colder. For Charlotte asked to see the estate books. All of them. The rentals, the accounts, the receipts and disbursements 11 years back, because a holder is entitled to them, and because her father's cardinal rule was that you read the books before you read the man. And she watched Elias Sowerby's careful hands go still on his desk, and she saw the flicker cross his heavy face, quick as a rat behind a wall, and Charlotte Weston, who had caught a Marquess's agent in a forgery by exactly such a flicker, thought, there it is. He is afraid of the books. A man is only afraid of the books when the books will hang him. The accounts are complex, Miss Weston, Sowerby said smoothly. His Grace's late father was extravagant, cards, horses, a want of economy. The estate fell into debt through simple luxury, as these old families do. I doubt a lady would find the detail rewarding. Better to name your price for the paper and let me arrange matters between gentlemen. I am not a lady, Mr. Sowerby, Charlotte said pleasantly. I am a banker. Bring me the books. Before Stanmore Court had finished misjudging the woman at its east door, and it would go on misjudging her for another day yet, which is a day longer than it could afford, there was a single morning of grey quiet in which two men underestimated Charlotte Weston for two different reasons, the Duke out of pride and the steward out of fear, and neither yet suspected that she had already begun, with a clerk and a locked box and a banker's cold patience, to take the whole house apart. If a story of a reckoning fairly kept is the kind that keeps you listening, stay. What she found in those books changed everything. She read the Stanmore accounts for 2 days in the inn parlour, Mr. Finch at her elbow, and what she found was not extravagance. It was theft. patient, decade-long, beautifully disguised theft. The late Duke had gamed, yes, and spent, but nothing near enough to sink an estate of that size. The estate had been sunk deliberately, £1,000 and £2,000 a year siphoned into accounts that led, when Charlotte followed them through 3 false names and a wine merchant that did not exist, to Elias Sowerby. He had borrowed against the estate in the old Duke's name, and pocketed the borrowings, and let the debt swell year on year, and when the old Duke died and the young one proved too proud to look at a ledger, Sowerby had simply gone on. The mortgage her father held was not the record of a family's folly. It was the measure of one man's crime. And the current Duke of Stanmore, arrogant, insufferable, cold, did not know. He believed the story his steward had told him, that his father had ruined them and there was nothing to be done but marry money or sell. He had been robbed for 20 years by the man he trusted with everything, and he was too proud to open the books that would have shown him, and his pride had cost him his house. Charlotte Weston sat back in the inn parlour with the truth of it in her hands, and she felt the thing her father had warned her about, the pull toward a man who is drowning and does not know why. She had come to Kent prepared to foreclose on a wastrel. She had found instead a robbed man too proud to be pitied, and a thief who had counted on that pride for 20 years. And she understood that she now held not one paper, but 2. The mortgage that could ruin the Duke, and the proof that could save him. What she did with them was hers to choose. It was, she would reflect later, the first moment she stopped thinking of the Duke of Stanmore as a lesson he had earned, and started thinking of him as a man she might not be able to leave to drown. She went to the great house the next morning. She used the front door. No one stopped her. The footman had learned her face, and something in the set of her shoulders had changed, and she walked into the Duke's library unannounced and set the locked dispatch box on his desk between them. "I told you that you would rather have opened the door to me," Charlotte said. "Sit down, Your Grace. I am the holder of the mortgage on Stanmore Court, and I have come to tell you 3 things, and you will want to be sitting for the second." The Duke of Stanmore did not sit, but the colour left his face by slow degrees as she laid it before him. The paper, the arrears, the plain fact that the plainly dressed woman he had sent to the servants' entrance held the deed to his gate and his park, and the room they stood in. And the narrator will tell you that a lesser telling of this tale would have let the Duke rage. And this one did not, because the true measure of the man came out not in fury, but in the thing he said when the rage might have come. "My God," said the Duke of Stanmore, very quietly, sitting down at last. "I told you to leave the tradesman's tin at home." He put a hand over his eyes. "I have been insufferable to the one person on earth with the power to put me in the street, and I did it for sport, over a watch. There is a kind of man who deserves exactly what is coming to him, Miss Weston, and I begin to see I am he." And there, in the crack of the cold armour, in the flash of a self-knowledge she had not expected from him, Charlotte saw the man beneath the Duke for the first time, and against every rule her father ever taught her, she was moved by him. She had expected him to bluster. He had, instead, indicted himself. It is a rare and disarming thing to watch a proud man reckon himself honestly, and she was not proof against it, though she would have given a great deal to be. "That is the first thing," she said, more gently than she had meant to. "Here is the second, and it is worse and better both. Your father did not ruin you, Your Grace. Your steward did." And she opened the box, and showed him the false names and the wine merchant that did not exist, and the £1,000 a year bleeding out of his house into Elias Sowerby's pocket for 20 years, and she watched the Duke of Stanmore learn, in the space of 10 minutes, that everything he believed about his own ruin was a lie a servant had told him to cover a theft, and that his pride, His refusal ever to stoop to a ledger had held the door open for the thief the whole time. He rose and went to the window. His hands were not quite steady, and when he turned back, the practiced coldness was gone entirely, and what stood in the library was only a man who had been robbed and shamed and did not know where to put either. What followed were two of the strangest days Stanmore Court had known in a generation. For the Duke of Stanmore did a thing no Stanmore had done in living memory. He sat down at his own table with his own books, and he asked a banker's daughter to teach him to read them. They worked by lamplight both evenings. The singed reality of his ruin spread between them, and Charlotte found the labor uncovering the man beneath the rank, a column at a time. "You have truly never looked at these," she said the first night, not unkindly, turning a rental he plainly could not follow. "Not once in 11 years. How does a man own a thing and never look at it?" "A Stanmore does not look," the Duke said. He said it lightly, and then, because the lamplight and the shame had worn something through, he said it truly. "My father taught me that. He ruled this house by contempt, for tradesmen, for tenants, for softness, for any close inspection of anything. Because to look closely at a matter is to admit you might find yourself at fault in it. And a duke," he said, "is never at fault. A duke is simply obeyed." He caught me once as a boy of 9, crying over a dead spaniel. And he did not comfort me. He told me that grief was a thing that happened to smaller men, and he made me stand in the hall until I had put my face right. He turned a page he could not read. So I learned to want nothing I could be seen to lose, and to look closely at nothing, and to keep every soul at the length of my own arm, and it made me exactly the kind of man a thief prays for. Sowerby robbed me for 20 years behind a wall my father built. I have been so busy being above it all that I never once looked down and saw the floor going out from under me. Charlotte Weston set down her pen. She had come to Kent to judge whether this man deserved to keep his house. She had not expected to sit in a cold library and watch him hand her, without defense, the whole sad architecture of why he was as he was, and it undid her far more than charm could have. "My father was the opposite of yours," she said, after a while, gentler. "He looked at everything. He used to say a man who will not open his books is a man with something he cannot bear to know." She drew out the plain steel watch and set it on the table between them, and turned it so the engraving caught the lamp. "You asked me what it says. He could have carried gold, and he chose steel, and had 2 words put on it, and made me carry it after him, so I would never forget them. There, that is the whole of my father, and the whole of me." The Duke of Stanmore leaned in and read, on the cheap steel he had sneered at in his own hall, the words "Oh no man," and he was quiet a long moment, and when he looked up his face had nothing of the Duke left in it at all. "I told you to leave that at home," he said, "because it shamed me to look at it. I think I knew, even then, that a man who lives by those 2 words has a kind of wealth I was born with every advantage to earn, and never did." He almost smiled. "You have been the richest person in every room you have entered in this house, Miss Weston, and I sent you to the servants' door. God help me! I cannot think why you are still under my roof." "Nor can I," said Charlotte, and found she was smiling too, and that the smiling was dangerous. "It is very poor business. Why are you telling me this?" He said then, low, the lightness gone, "Truly, you hold the paper. You could let Sowerby's rot bring the whole thing down, and buy Stanmore off the wreck for pennies, and no court in England would say you did wrong. You are not behaving like a creditor, Charlotte." He came a step nearer, searching her face. It was the first time he had used her Christian name, and neither of them remarked on it, and both of them heard it. "Why?" They were close now, nearer than the desk had allowed, and the grey window light lay between them, and for one moment neither of them stepped back from the small dangerous distance that had opened. Charlotte was aware of the warmth of him and the raw new honesty in his face, and how badly, how inconveniently she wished to close the space rather than keep it, and she understood, standing there, that she had already made her choice and had only been declining to say it aloud. She had come to Kent holding the power to put this man in the street, and somewhere between the servant's door and the lamplit ledgers she had decided not to use it, decided it as plainly as any figure she had ever entered in a book, and whatever it cost her. Whatever the world would say of a creditor who saved her debtor for the look on his face, she meant to keep the paper and hand the man his life back. It was, she thought, the worst piece of business her father's daughter had ever transacted, and she would not have undone it for the world. The Duke saw the decision cross her face and drew breath to answer it, and the library door opened, and Elias Sowerby came in with a sheaf of papers and a smile, and the moment shut like a ledger. "Your Grace, Miss Weston has been troubling you with figures, I see. Allow me to get out," said the Duke. But Sowerby had seen the open box, and the false name pages spread on the desk, and the steward's soft face performed a swift and frightened calculation, and Charlotte watched him make the only move a cornered thief can make. He reached for the pride he had used against this family for 20 years. "Your Grace, I see she has spun you a tale." "Of course she has. Consider the source, a moneylender's daughter who holds your debt and now claims your loyal steward is a criminal. All so you will look to her as your savior and not your creditor. It is an old trick and a low one. She means to own you, Your Grace, house and title and person, and she has begun by turning you against the one man who has served you faithfully. Will you truly take a tradeswoman's word over 20 years of my service? It was expertly done, and it very nearly worked, because it was aimed with precision at exactly the flaw that had let Sowerby thrive, the Duke's certainty that people beneath him wanted his rank. For one cold instant, Charlotte saw the old pride flicker back into the Duke's face, the reflexive readiness to believe that the plain woman with the steel watch was, after all, only grasping upward, and that the smooth gentleman at his shoulder was one of his own. She saw the dismissal rise in him again. She had shown him the truth in black ink, and still, for one heartbeat, 20 years of a thief's flattery weighed more than 3 days of an honest woman's proof, and it wounded her more than the servant's entrance had, because she had let herself hope. She bore it, she let him see her bear it, and said nothing in her own defense, because a woman who must argue for her own honesty has already lost, and she would not. It was the Duke of Stanmore who broke the silence, and he broke it in a voice like a closing door. 20 years of your service, Sowerby, he said slowly, not looking at the steward, but at Charlotte, and in all of it you never once called me robbed. You called my father a wastrel to my face, and let me believe it, and I did believe it, because it cost me nothing and asked nothing of me. This lady has called me a fool for 3 days, and been right every hour. He turned then and looked at his steward, and it was the first time in the tale that the Duke of Stanmore used his rank the way rank is meant to be used. You are dismissed. You will not touch another paper in this house. You will remain on the estate until I send to London for men to examine every account you have kept. And if what Miss Weston shows me holds, and I no longer doubt that it will, you will answer for all of it at the assizes. Get out of my library." Sowerby went white, and then he went out, and the two of them heard his careful footsteps quicken in the corridor, and Charlotte Weston, who had caught a great many guilty men, felt the cold drop in her stomach that comes when a cornered animal is let loose to run rather than taken in hand. "You should have held him," she said. "Your Grace, A man like that does not go quietly to the assizes. The proof is all in those books, and the books are in his office still, and he has just been given until London the freedom of this house. She was already moving. He will not run. He will burn them. They reached the East Yard at a run, and they were too late, and not too late. The steward's office window already showed the orange flicker. Sowerby within feeding ledgers to the hearth in great desperate armfuls. 20 years of proof going up to save his neck. The Duke went through the door first and took Sowerby by the collar, and Charlotte went past them both to the fire with her bare hands and dragged out what she could, beating the flames from the singed pages against the flagstones, because those figures were a man's whole vindication, and she would not watch them burn. She saved the greater part of them. She burned the heel of one hand doing it, a hurt she did not notice until much later. And when the household came running and the fire was out, and Elias Sowerby stood pinned and sooty and finished in the ruin of his own office, it was Charlotte Weston, kneeling on the wet flagstones with the salvaged books in her scorched hands, who looked up at the gathered servants and the neighbours the smoke had drawn and laid the whole of it bare. "These are the accounts of Stanmore," she said. And her voice was steady, and it carried, and she held up the singed pages one by one and read the figures, the false names, the wine merchant that never was, the £1,000 a year for 20 years, until every soul in that yard understood that the man they had feared as the master's right hand was a thief who had tried to burn the proof, and that the plain woman with the burned hand had pulled it out of the fire. She did not spare a glance for her own hurt. She read the reckoning to its end, in daylight, before witnesses, the way her father had taught her a true account should always be settled, and when she finished, Elias Sowerby had nothing left to be but caught. The Duke of Stanmore knelt down on the wet stone beside her, there in front of his whole household, and took her burned hand in both of his, as carefully as if it were the last honest thing in England, and began to say that he was sorry for the door, for the watch, for the servant's entrance, for the instant in the library when he had almost believed the thief over her, and Charlotte stopped him. "Stop apologizing, Your Grace." She was smiling, though her hand hurt and her eyes stung with more than smoke. "I did not pull your ledgers out of a fire to collect an apology. I did it because somewhere in the last 3 days I stopped wanting to foreclose on you and started wanting to save you, which is a great inconvenience to a woman who prides herself on her judgment. So do not tell me you are sorry. Tell me plainly what you mean to do now that you know exactly who I am and who you are, and let me decide whether I hold your paper as your creditor or hand it back to you as something else entirely." "Something else?" said the Duke of Stanmore, unashamed of the household watching, unashamed of anything any more. "Charlotte, for God's sake, something else. I have been a duke my whole life, and it has made me a smaller man every year of it, and you walked in at my servant's door and made me feel, for the first time since I was a boy, that I might be worth more than my rank and my acres. I do not want you to hand me back the mortgage. I want you to keep it, and the man it was almost the ruin of, and let me spend what I have left learning to deserve the one person who saw me drowning and chose to reach in." The kiss she gave him then, kneeling in the wet ash of a thief's undoing, was brief, and it broke open in her a warmth she had spent years keeping frozen behind a banker's cold good sense, the plain astonishment of being chosen. At last, not for her £40,000, but for the burn on her hand and the truth in her mouth, by the one man who had every reason of pride to look down on her, and had, in the end, looked up. By the following summer, the great gate of Stanmore Court stood open more often than shut, because the new Duchess held the view that a house that had hidden a thief for 20 years had done quite enough hiding, and she meant the place to be looked at honestly from now on. Elias Sowerby was tried at the Maidstone Assizes on the evidence a burned hand had pulled from his own hearth, and the false names and the phantom wine merchant did for him exactly as Charlotte had promised, and he went across the sea to answer for it where thieves went, and the estate he had bled for 2 decades began, under a duchess who could read a ledger better than any man in Kent, quietly to mend. They were married in the village church that had christened 500 years of Stanmores, and the neighbourhood which had first sniffed at a banker's daughter marrying up came round with remarkable speed once it understood that the banker's daughter had saved the county's oldest house from a swindler, for the world is always willing to admire a thing after the danger of it has passed. Charlotte let them admire. She had learned long ago exactly what the good opinion of a room is worth, and exactly what it is not, and she kept her own counsel and her own accounts and her own quiet certainty of what she had chosen and why. She never did foreclose. She tore up nothing either. Her father had raised no fool, and the mortgage stayed where it was. A debt between husband and wife that neither ever meant to call, a thing they kept less as an obligation than as a private joke, and a truer wedding line than any the vicar spoke. There was a child by the spring after that, a boy, and the Duke of Stanmore, who had once stood a weeping boy of 9 in a cold hall until he put his face right, was seen more than once by the astonished household sitting on the library floor in his shirt-sleeves, letting his son cry as long as the boy pleased, and comforting him and telling him, quietly, that grief was a thing that happened to the very largest men of all. The wall his father had built came down in that library a stone at a time, and the woman who had walked in at the servant's door pulled the last of it down simply by being, every ordinary day, worth looking closely at. But on the mantel of the library where the Duke had once sent her to the servant's door, there sat, from that summer on, a plain steel watch, and any guest who remarked on so cheap a thing in so grand a room would find the Duke of Stanmore take it up and turn it to the light and read out, with a private smile at his duchess across the room, the 2 words her father had chosen to engrave on steel he could have had in gold. "Oh no, man, I owe her everything," the Duke would say, "which she tells me is a different matter entirely." And permitted, and he would set the watch back in its place of honour, in the house she had pulled out of the fire, in the country where the old families learned, that year, not to judge a person by the metal of their watch, and the Duke and Duchess of Stanmore would look at each other across the warm room, a man who had spoken too soon, and a woman who had waited to be worth the hearing, and be, for a great many settled and honest years, entirely square with the world and with each other.